Mark and Sarah Stamping Retreat. Today we're going to be creating some masculine cards, or at least the brief for this magazine commission was masculine cards. I actually think that I know a lot of women that would like them as well, but we are going for more masculine vibes today. And to do that we're going to be using this stamp set which comes free with this month's Creative Stamping magazine, and it's a really nice kind of outdoorsy type set. And then we're also going to be using some of the downloads that come with it as well. So I've printed these myself, and this is just a selection from the downloads. There's many more papers than this in the downloads, but I'm going to be using these three, and then also the set of sentiments that come with it. And you can see there's some really nice ones in there, like some like warm wishes and have a beautiful day and happy birthday that are kind of a bit more generic, and some that are kind of more suited to the stamp set, like the wild and free, find your happy place and chill, things like that. So for this first card, I've cut down some of that snowy paper to 4 by 5¼ inches. I'm just going to place that on my card front, and then I'm going to trace through this circle that I've die cut in the middle of it. So this circle's around about 3¼ inches. It takes up a lot of the card front. And the reason I'm doing that is I want to put this waterfall behind here. So I'm going to use my stamp wheel to stamp this so that if it doesn't stamp perfectly the first time, then I'll still be able to get a nice impression. So then I want to colour the area within the circle. I'm going to go slightly outside the circle because I'm going to lift this up and I don't want you to be able to see any white, but mainly it's kind of the area within the circle that I want to colour. So then I realised that I've stamped this too far over here, because if I put this back on, then you can see this here. So what I've done is I've cut another piece of cardstock with the circle in the same place, and I've made it the same size as my card front. So I'm going to just rub off those pencil lines. So then I'm going to stamp a couple of these clusters of trees. And then I'll just colour those in. So then I'll just cut those out. So then I'm just going to write the thinking of you sentiment at the bottom of this piece of pattern paper. Then I'm going to use foam tape to add that onto my card. And then I can pop that on there. So then I'm going to add some foam pads behind my trees. I'll just add them on here. So then there's that first card done. So then for this next card I want to build up a little scene. So I'm going to stamp these mountains onto some grey cardstock in teal ink. And then these are layering stamps, so I'm then going to line up this next layer. And I'm going to stamp that in Peacock Feathers Distress Oxiding. And then I want to wash that out a bit, so I'm also going to use a white craft ink to go over the top again. So I'm going to cut that out. And then I'm going to use these little bear silhouettes. I'm going to use the Peacock Feathers ink to stamp those as well. And then I'm going to cut those out. So annoyingly, I thought I'd press play on my video, but I hadn't. So what I've done here is I've covered a 5-inch square card blank with the tree pattern paper. Then I've cut a 3½ inch square piece of cardstock. I've put a bit of this snowy paper at the top that we used on the first card. And I've added across my stamped mountains, and I've cut the sides off those to make them the same size as the square. Then I've added this from the pack at the bottom and backed that with a piece of teal cardstock slightly bigger, and then I've added my bears across there. So then for my next card, I'm going to use a bit of heat embossed resist. So I'm going to create a 5-inch square card blank with these teal circles. Then this circle is about 1/2 inch smaller, and this circle is about 1/4 inch smaller again. So then I'm going to use some of the little animals on this, and I'm going to stamp them in embossing ink all the way across my card front. And it is really difficult to see where I've stamped them, so I'm going to actually heat emboss after each time I stamp, just so that I can see where the ones I've already stamped are. So I'm heat embossing them in my clear gloss superfine embossing powder from Wow. And then I'm going to come in with the birds. And I'll do a couple of foxes. I know I've stamped the birds in those spaces, so I'll do the foxes elsewhere. I don't need to worry about the middle of the circle because we're going to cover that over. So I'm really concentrating on the edges. And then I'll add a couple of these teeny bears to finish. Then I'm going to grab my Distress Oxide ink. So I'm going to start with Salvaged Patina in the middle. And then I'm going to add some peacock feathers around the outside. And then I'll go back in with some more Salvaged Patina just to make that blend a bit smoother. So I'm going to grab this cloth and just go over the animals just to get off the excess ink, and it really helps to kind of brighten them up. So I'm going to grab this stag, I'm going to stamp it in teal ink onto some cardstock, and I'm going to cut that out. Then let's put our card together. So I'm putting one of my 5-inch circles in at 1/4 inch and just chopping that bit off the edge, and that's the bit that will stop it rocking and rolling. So I'm going to add it on the other side at 1/2 inch, and I'm going to score that. So I'm making sure this line's parallel here, and then I'm just scoring across the top. Then I will add some glue above that score line, and then I can add this on. So that's then my card blank, and it stands up nicely because we cut that piece off there. So then I'm going to add this piece onto my white piece, and then I'm going to add this onto my card blank. So then I've cut this wild and free from the downloaded sentiments, and I'm just backing that with a circle in teal cardstock. I think as long as you have a printer, then sentiment downloads are so good because you can just use them over and over. So then I'm going to pop that and my stag up on some foam pads. So then there's that card finished. So then for my next card, I'm going to do some blending. So I've got a 5-inch square card blank, and then I've also got a 5-inch square masking sheet. You can see I've cut a circle out of. So the circle's about 3 inches, and you can see I've kind of off-centered it a bit. So I'm going to add this onto my card front. And then this is going to be like a moon, so I'm going to add on some scattered straw in there. Sorry, that was antique linen. Now I'm going to add on some scattered straw, which is this slightly yellower colour. Then I'm going to take that off. So then I'm going to add the circle that I cut out of the middle over the top of that moon. So then I'm going to add on some cloudy sky around there. And then I'm going to add some peacock feathers in from the sides. So then I can remove this. We've got our moon. And then I'm going to splatter it with some water to add some texture. So then I'm going to set this aside to dry for a second. So then I'm going to grab this grass and I'm just going to stamp it in black ink across the bottom of my card. I'm going to stamp a couple of layers of that. And because it looks blacker in the middle where the two have overlapped, I'm going to use a fine liner pen just to add in some marks to the bottom, just to kind of blend that in a bit. So then I'm going to use my Stays On ink pad and I'm going to add on this wolf. And then I'm going to use Stays On ink again to add on May the Adventures Continue. And the reason that I'm using that ink pad is that it's a bit brighter on the Distress Oxide ink that kind of saps away some of the brightness. So then I'm just going to go in with a mix of my jet black Ultra New alcohol marker and my fine liner pen, and I'm just going to darken up some of those images. And I'm going to continue this mound down so it doesn't kind of look out of place there. You don't want it kind of balancing on top of the grass blades. Then I think that's a really fun card, and it's a one layer too, so good for sending through the post. So then for my final card, I've got a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card blank, and I've got these pieces of cardstock that I've cut down to 5.5 inches wide, and I'm just going to tear along them and add strips onto my card. So I'm going to start with some of this snowflake one at the top. And because it's printed paper, obviously it's got the white core, so that shows up really nicely on there. And then I'll move on to some of this kind of snowy sky paper. And this kind of ripped background is really great for using up any scraps you have. Like, it doesn't have to be big long strips like this. You could just rip up small strips and kind of make a collage with them. And it's quite a nice way of just getting quite a textured background. And then I'm going to use some of this kind of snowy paper and I'm going to stamp on this Life With You Is a Beautiful Thing. I'm going to cut a tag end into this. So then I've got a thin strip of teal cardstock that I'm just going to add to the bottom of the card. And that'll just help ground everything a little bit. And then I've stamped and coloured this house from the stamp set. I'm going to add that on some foam pads, and I'm going to add this on some foam pads as well. So that's that one done. So there are our 5 cards for today. I'd love to know which is your favourite. Please do let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's cards, I'd really appreciate you clicking like below, and you can also press subscribe if you'd like to see future videos. If you press the bell button and select all, then YouTube will also notify you when I've got a new video available. All of the products that I've used for today's cards are listed in the description below, and there's also a link there to my blog where you can find a picture supply list if that helps you find what you're looking for. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope to see you again soon.